This is a 2002 BMW M5 in pristine condition with only 56,000 miles. And this is a 2004 BMW M3, also in pristine condition with only 30,000 miles. And pretty soon, you're not going to be able to afford them. I say that because older BMW M cars are already starting to trickle up in value, and I think pretty soon they're going to start to shoot up in value. I borrowed these two from Automobili Limited, a local dealership here in the Philadelphia area with an unending supply of amazing inventory. You can check it out in the video description below. Automobili Limited has these cars listed for sale for $44,950 and $39,950, which is about the going rate for top-of-the-market pristine examples like these. It may seem like a lot for a couple of old BMWs, but these aren't just any old BMWs. And today I'm going to explain why I think there will come a time someday soon when we will tell our friends that we could remember a day when you could pick these up for only 40 and 45 grand. If you click the link below to go to autotrader.com/oversteer, you can find more of my thoughts on these cars. My theory about old BMW M models rising in value started with my friend Drew, who recently bought himself an E36 M3. Now, this is the most common older BMW M car, and it's also one of the least powerful, and yet Drew noticed as he was searching that prices were on the upswing. Some people were paying $20,000 to $30,000 for nice E36 M3s, which is double what they were going for only a few years ago. Mind you, this is for a 20-year-old car with only 240 horsepower. That got me thinking about these cars, the E46 M3 and the E39 M5, which are far more desirable and powerful than earlier models, but they come from that sweet spot in the BMW world, the time when cars were fun and exciting enough to put a smile on your face, but not so complicated and high-tech that you were always worried something would break. In fact, it's that simplicity that's one of the reasons I think these cars are going to end up being so desirable.
For example, in the M5, here's an old light switch, and listen to this thing firmly click into place when you turn on. In the middle, yes, that's right, a real parking brake, none of this electronic stuff. Want to change the climate settings? A bunch of simple, obvious buttons, no infotainment integration and touchscreen delays here. The gauges are actual gauges, and they look nice. You want a coin tray? It pops right out from below the window switches, perfect for dropping off coins at roadside tolls. The turn signal stalk, oh how I love the turn signal stalk, which feels great and stays down when you push it. It doesn't pop back into place like the new BMWs, it just works like you'd expect. Overall, the M5's interior layout is just so simple, so perfect, so Teutonic. No gimmicks or unnecessary lines or idiotic choices just for the sake of being different. Of course, the M3's interior is exactly the same way. It may look a little dull with all that gray and black, but it also means you don't have to put up with bad details like a floor-mounted parking brake or 37 BMW M logos covering every surface, including a carbon fiber M cigarette lighter. Oh, and speaking of the cigarette lighter, even that is simple and obvious, because nothing in this car is excessive or garish.
But simplicity isn't the only benefit. Another one is size. The modern 5 Series is 8 inches longer than this car, 3 inches wider, and 350 pounds heavier. The modern M4, which is the latest version of this car, is 7 inches longer, 3 inches wider, and while I don't have the weight figure, I can guess that the new one is about 40 zillion pounds heavier. The truth is that modern BMW models have just gotten so big and bloated and full of technology and luxury that they've lost that simple, tossable feel that the older ones benefited from so greatly. To compensate for the added weight and luxury and size and width, BMW has done something a little bit different with the modern M cars, namely, they're just throwing a lot of power at them. This M5 had only 400 horsepower. The new one has up to 575. This M3 only 333 horsepower. The latest M4 has almost 450. Sure, the newest M cars are a lot faster than these old ones, but they're also able to get you in trouble a lot quicker. And when you floor the accelerator, you have to focus a lot more. Think about it. The new cars are so big that it's a lot of weight and mass to be moving at a high rate of speed. Gone are the days of the athletic backroad cruisers where you can use the whole engine and go through the gears at your leisure and you don't have to worry about breaking all the speed limits. With the new M cars, in just 4 seconds you are violating every single legal speed limit in the United States. But even if you're of the opinion that more power is always better, you have to admit that these cars have one big benefit over modern BMW M cars, namely styling. These cars are so understated, so cool, so simple, so special. Their looks really only appeal to enthusiasts. The new BMW M cars have giant flared fenders, and they're all bright colors, and they have huge black wheels, and they have intakes and hoops and scoops everywhere, and they have orange brake calipers now. I don't even know what's going on. Those cars are really popular with the South Florida show-off crowd, but these things came from a time when you didn't have to tell everybody that you were cool. It was just sort of understood. And then there's another reason why these older M cars are rising in value, and that is they're just getting rarer. A couple of years ago, when these things were really cheap, a lot of people bought them and modified them. You know the crowd I'm talking about. They crashed them, they didn't treat them well, they didn't perform any maintenance because they could barely afford to buy the car in the first place. They cut the springs, they stanced them, they added green wheels and eBay taillights. It was a really bad situation. Clean, untouched examples like these are almost impossible to find as a result of that, and that's jacking up prices for anybody who really wants one. And then, of course, there's the final factor that's pushing up the value of the E46 M3 and the E39 M5, and that is quite simply the way they drive. Today, I'm going to take them out on the road and tell you what I think about the driving experience, and then I'm going to give both of these cars a Doug score so you can see where they stand. I'm going to start with my favorite of these two, the M5. All right, driving the E39 M5, 56,000 miles. This car doesn't even have any of the little crystals in the LCD screen out. It's that perfect. If you have BMW, you know exactly what I'm talking about. My first impressions are, it is just so solid. Every button just feels solid and hard to press and really well built and expensive. This car came from an era where when you had a luxury car, people weren't necessarily focusing on how much technology you had, but sort of how well is it built. And this car was built very well. I have it in regular mode, and in regular mode it feels like a nice, comfortable cruiser, just an easy driver. One interesting thing about this car, when you put it in sport mode, it like comes alive. The really interesting thing, the clear thing that happens is the throttle response just feels a lot sharper. A lot of cars I put in sport mode and the automaker says it does this, it tightens that, this happens at 28 whatever is a second. This car, you can actually feel there's a lot more play in the gear lever than in modern cars. It's actually kind of funny how much play there is. Even when it's in gear, you can move the shift lever an inch or two in any direction. Of course, in modern BMWs, you can't get a stick shift, so man, it handles well. It stays really flat. For a car that's 15 years old, it still feels very flat, and it's fast. Just feels solid, it feels stable, it feels planted. This is how a German car should feel. And I don't feel like I'm lugging around extra weight. The car is just reasonably solid. I can reach out and touch the passenger side door panel. You can't do that in a 5 Series anymore. The clutch and shifter are very easy to work. They're very smooth. The clutch especially is just nice and smooth. The catch point is very obvious. It's linear travel. It's perfect. And it's fun. It's incredible how pokey this car is. This car is the size of a current M3, and so it actually feels tossable and kind of light on its feet, which is impressive. That's the thing that's so amazing about this car. It feels in a lot of ways like a modern car. You don't have to put up with classic car problems with this car. There's no carburetor. It doesn't feel ancient. It doesn't feel really slow. You don't feel unsafe. This car has airbags everywhere and everything like a modern car. But at the same time, you don't have to put up with new car size and excessive power, technology that you don't necessarily want. It's in that sweet spot, in my opinion, that sweet spot of cars in sort of the mid-2000s where it was just the right level of performance combined with technology, combined with luxury, combined with safety. Okay, so that is a cool car, but so is this. So now it's time to get behind the wheel of the E46 M3. Now we're driving E46 M3. I haven't driven one of these since college. There was a guy in college named Zabby who was a friend of mine who had one of these, and we all had crappy cars, and he had this, and he was the coolest guy. Everybody wanted to ride with him, and I wanted to drive his car, and it was so cool back then. And then it became kind of a used car, and it was like, oh, people are modding those, they're cheap now, whatever. And now it's becoming cool again. Instantly you can tell that this car is a little bit harder edge than the M5. It's more of a performance car. I don't have to press the sport button to get sort of the harsher ride and the better throttle response. You can hear more sound. The M5 is certainly more of a luxury cruiser. They knew that this was more of a true sports car. But still, a lot of the same benefits that I like about the M5, I like about this car. Everything just feels so solid. It's definitely higher strung. When you floor it, you're kind of goaded to going a little bit faster. But again, this car doesn't really feel all that fast. It feels relatively quick, but by modern standards, it's not like a scorcher. The fun comes on a back road like the one I'm on, going around a corner like this one. You drop down a gear and you kind of send yourself through it, and you can use the whole car. I can use the whole engine without worrying about getting into trouble or having a safety risk or something like that. This car is particularly sweet. That M5 was nice, but this thing with 29,000 miles, I mean, this car is just in perfect shape. And an unmodified one is so cool because nobody really ever modded those M5s, but these things got modded to the hilt by people who, you know, barely qualified for financing at 14.9%, and they really just wanted M3 to look cool, and the resale value of those cars isn't as strong. Most of them either got damaged or destroyed. They have rebuilt titles. They can never really go back to how they were. The ride is definitely harsher. This definitely feels like more of a high-strung sports car than the M5 did, which is fine. Two different cars for two different purposes. Yeah, I mean, it's quick, but it's not insane, but it's fun to be able to use the whole car. I floored it there for whatever, 4 seconds, and I'm only up to 60, as opposed to in an M5, a new M4, when you floor it for 4 seconds and you're going 97 miles an hour and your car's bright blue and you have orange brake calipers and everybody's calling the cops on you. This thing is subtle and it's quick, and it's just, these cars are just so sweet. And so that's the E39 BMW M5 and the E46 BMW M3, two cars which I truly believe will be selling for $100,000 within the next decade. Now, anytime anybody makes a proclamation like that, they tend to get laughed at until it comes true. For example, if you had said in the 1990s that muscle cars would soon be selling for $500,000, people literally would have laughed at you. But then it happened. If you had said 15 years ago that the E30 BMW M3 would be selling for $60,000, $70,000, people would have laughed at you. But then it happened. And while you may laugh at me for saying that a couple of used BMWs will soon be worth 6 figures, remember this video when you see one cross the auction block for over 100 grand. And remember when you could have had them for 45. And now, time to give these two cars the Doug score.
I'm going to score both of these cars together since they're in the same video, and I'll start with the weekend categories and styling. The E46 M3 is nice, better than average, so it gets a 6 out of 10, but the E39 is handsome, truly gorgeous. Maybe one of the most attractive sedans ever designed. It earns an 8 out of 10, which for me is a tough score to get. Acceleration, both cars do 0 to 60 in 4.7, 4.8 seconds, earning them both a 6 out of 10. Handling, the E39 M5 is nice and easily earns a 6 out of 10, but the E46 M3 is sharper and sportier with more precise steering, and it earns a 7 out of 10. For cool factor, this one's undeniable. I like the E46 M3, but it still has a bit of the used car modified culture crowd to me. I acknowledge them when I see them on the street, but the E39 M5, especially one this nice, gets a head turn, and that gives it a 7 out of 10 to the M3's 6 out of 10. Finally, importance, same deal. The E46 M3 followed up on a formula and was executed well, but the E39 M5 may just be the last in the era before the engines and the dimensions got huge. It gets an 8 out of 10, while the E46 M3 still gets a respectable 6. Added up, and the M5's weekend score is a really strong 35 out of 50, while the M3 comes in at a good 31. Yes, the M3 is a little bit more fun to drive, but the M5 is more attractive, more important, and frankly, just plain cooler. Moving on to the daily categories, features are minimal for both cars by modern standards. The M3 earns a 3 out of 10, while the M5 earns a 4 as it adds a few items, including a navigation system. Luxury measures comfort, and both cars are more comfortable than average, though the M5 is slightly better, and it earns a 7 out of 10 to the M3's 6. Quality measures materials and reliability. Materials in both cars are truly excellent, but reliability is less of a selling point. These cars are both expensive to own and suffer from Vanos engine trouble, but the M3 had more problems than the M5, including the famous subframe issues and expensive repairs on cars with the SMG transmission. It gets a 5 out of 10, while the M5 gets a 7. Next up is practicality. The M3 has 7.7 cubic feet of cargo space, giving it a 3, while the M5's 11.1 give it a 4 out of 10. Finally, value. These two cars may be expensive, but they're both above average in value. The M3 will go up, but the M5 is already shooting up, and it's headed for even higher levels. The M3 gets a 6 out of 10, and the M5 gets a 7, though part of me wonders if it should be even higher. That brings the total daily score for the M5 to 29 out of 50, and for the M3 to 23 out of 50. Probably right about where you'd expect them. Add it all up and the Doug scores are, for the M3, 54 out of 100, and for the M5, 64 out of 100. The M3 score places it right where you'd expect, duking it out with some of the lesser sports cars I've scored, but the M5 is in the upper echelon and it deserves it. It's fun to drive every day, it's fun to drive on the weekends, and it's a truly special car. And pretty soon, you won't be able to afford either of these things.